Jungkook freezes outside a studio door when Jimin sings a haunting song that reveals a secret, one that answers the feelings Jungkook never dared confess. The red recording light glowed through the narrow glass window when Jungkook heard the first line of the song, and every step he had been about to take simply stopped. He stood there, hand hovering inches from the studio door handle, breath trapped somewhere between his chest and his throat. Inside, Jimin was singing. Not rehearsing, not joking around the way he usually did when everyone else was in the room. This voice was quieter, rawer, almost trembling as it floated through the dim hallway. I kept pretending I didn't know your heart because mine was already breaking. Jungkook's fingers slowly curled into a fist. That line didn't exist in any track they were working on. The hallway smelled faintly of coffee and old wood from the studio floors. The building was almost empty tonight. The rest of the team had left hours ago after a long rehearsal. Jungkook had only returned because he'd forgotten his headphones. Or at least that's what he told himself. Another lyric slipped through the door. You laugh too loud when you're nervous. You bite your lip when you lie. Jungkook's heart thudded violently. He did both of those things. Inside the studio, Jimin stood alone under the soft amber lights, headphones slightly crooked over his silver hair. His eyes were closed as he sang, fingers gripping the microphone stand like it was the only thing anchoring him. He had written the song 2 weeks ago, though no one knew. Not even Jungkook. Especially not Jungkook. Because the song was about him. Jimin had always been good at hiding things. On stage, he was radiant and fearless, but off stage, his emotions often lived behind careful smiles and teasing jokes. For years, he had mastered the art of turning feelings into choreography, into melodies, into glances that people assumed were just part of the performance. But this song was different. This one had started the night Jungkook fell asleep on the couch in the practice room after a brutal rehearsal. Jimin had stayed behind to turn off the lights, only to find Jungkook curled under his hoodie, breathing softly like the world hadn't carved so many expectations into him. Jimin had stood there for almost 10 minutes just watching him. He had realized something dangerous then. He didn't want to stop watching. Back in the hallway, Jungkook leaned closer to the door. Jimin's voice rose slightly, fragile but determined. I told myself it was nothing, just the way you look at everyone, but why does it feel like home when you say my name? Jungkook's chest tightened painfully. Memories flickered through his mind like scenes from a film. Late-night ramen after rehearsals, Jimin's hand briefly squeezing his shoulder before concerts, the way Jimin sometimes stared at him like he was trying to memorize something. Jungkook had always ignored it. Or pretended to. The truth was more complicated. Jungkook had spent years burying his own feelings beneath discipline and loyalty to the group. He feared changing the fragile balance they all depended on. Loving someone in silence felt safer than risking everything. But hearing Jimin sing those words made silence impossible. Inside the studio, Jimin reached the chorus. I was afraid to ask, afraid you'd disappear if I said it out loud. But if your heart hears this melody, maybe you'll understand. His voice cracked on the last word. Jimin lowered his head. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the quiet hum of recording equipment. Then the studio door opened. Jimin looked up instantly. Jungkook stood there, tall and motionless, the hallway light framing him like a silhouette. Neither of them spoke. Jimin's stomach dropped. He hadn't expected anyone to hear that song, especially not the person it belonged to. Jungkook stepped inside slowly, closing the door behind him. You wrote that, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Jimin swallowed, forcing a weak laugh, just messing around with lyrics. Jungkook shook his head. No. He walked closer until they were only a few feet apart. Under the soft lights, Jimin could see the tension in Jungkook's jaw, the way his hands trembled slightly. "You described things only I do," Jungkook said. Jimin looked away. Silence filled the room again, thicker than before. For years their friendship had been effortless, playful, loud. But now every second felt fragile, like glass waiting to shatter. Finally, Jimin spoke. It wasn't supposed to be heard. His voice was almost a whisper. Jungkook felt something twist painfully in his chest. "Why?" Jimin laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "Because some feelings ruin everything." Jungkook flinched. Jimin rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit he'd never quite gotten rid of. "I didn't want to lose what we have," he continued. "You're important to me, Jungkook, more than I should probably admit." Jungkook stared at the floor for a moment. His mind was racing, but underneath the chaos something quiet and certain had begun to settle. He remembered the countless times he had almost said something himself. The late nights he watched Jimin dance alone in the studio. The way his chest felt lighter whenever Jimin laughed. Maybe silence hadn't protected them after all. Maybe it had only kept them apart. Jungkook lifted his head. "You think I didn't know?" Jimin blinked. "What?" Jungkook let out a slow breath. "I knew you were hiding something," he said. "I just didn't know if I wanted to be right." Jimin's heart began pounding. "And now?" Jungkook took another step forward. Now they were so close, Jimin could hear his breathing. "I heard the song," Jungkook said softly. "And?" Jungkook's lips curved slightly, though his eyes were still serious. "It sounds like a reply." Jimin frowned, confused. A reply to what? Jungkook hesitated only a moment before answering. "To the feelings I've been trying to ignore for years." The words hung in the air like the final note of a melody. Jimin's eyes widened. "You're serious?" Jungkook nodded slowly. "Terrified," he admitted, "but serious." For a second, neither of them moved. Then Jimin laughed, a genuine, relieved laugh that echoed softly through the studio. "You realize," he said, "I spent 3 months writing that song because I thought you'd never feel the same." Jungkook shrugged, a little sheepish. "I spent 3 years pretending I didn't." They looked at each other, the tension slowly dissolving into something warmer. Jimin reached toward the mixing console and pressed a button. The recording played back through the speakers. His voice filled the room again. But this time, it didn't feel like a confession. It felt like an answer. Jungkook leaned against the desk beside him, listening carefully to every lyric. When the chorus arrived, he glanced at Jimin and said quietly, "You should release this." Jimin raised an eyebrow. "You think so?" Jungkook smiled. "It's honest." Jimin studied him for a moment, then nodded. Outside the studio windows the city lights shimmered like distant stars. Inside, the song finished playing. And for the first time since writing it, Jimin no longer felt like the lyrics were a secret he had to carry alone. The rain started sometime after midnight, tapping softly against the studio windows like nervous fingers on glass. Jungkook didn't notice at first. He was still standing beside Jimin in the dim control room, replaying the song again in his mind long after the speakers had gone silent. Jimin leaned back in the chair, spinning slowly as if trying to burn off the adrenaline that had been building inside him for hours. His silver hair caught the soft light above, and for a moment, Jungkook wondered how many times he had looked at Jimin without actually seeing him. "You're staring again," Jimin said suddenly. Jungkook blinked. "I'm not." "You are," Jimin replied calmly. "You always do that when you're thinking too hard." Jungkook crossed his arms. "And you always notice." Jimin smirked faintly. "Someone has to." The air between them had changed. It wasn't awkward exactly. It was heavier than that, like a storm waiting to break. Jungkook cleared his throat. So, what now? Jimin tilted his head. What do you mean? You basically confessed through a song, Jungkook said, and I just admitted I feel the same. That seems like a big moment. Jimin laughed quietly, though his fingers drummed nervously against the armrest. You make it sound like a press conference. Jungkook shrugged. Feels like one. For a second, they both imagined the chaos if anyone else heard that song and understood what it meant. The headlines, the speculation, the questions. Jimin's smile faded slightly. You know it wouldn't be simple, he said softly. Jungkook looked at him. When has anything in our lives ever been simple? Jimin opened his mouth to answer, but before he could speak, the studio door burst open. Finally, both of them jumped. Taehyung leaned against the doorway with dramatic exhaustion, holding 2 convenience store coffee cups and a bag of snacks. You guys realize it's almost 2 in the morning, he said. Jimin's heart nearly stopped. Taehyung, what are you doing here? Taehyung walked inside like he owned the place. I forgot my jacket, he replied casually, then he paused. His eyes moved between Jungkook and Jimin. Slowly, suspiciously. The tension in the room was thick enough to taste. Taehyung raised one eyebrow. Okay, he said slowly, what did I walk into? Jimin immediately stood up. Nothing. Jungkook said at the exact same time, everything. Jimin turned sharply toward him. Jungkook. What? Jungkook said defensively. Taehyung's grin spread slowly. Oh, this is interesting. He set the coffee down and crossed his arms like someone preparing for entertainment. Explain. Jimin rubbed his face with both hands. Please tell me you didn't hear anything. Taehyung tilted his head. Well, I did hear music in the hallway. Jimin groaned. But I couldn't hear the lyrics, Taehyung continued. Jimin froze. Really? Taehyung nodded. Soundproof doors, he said proudly, great investment. Jimin exhaled in relief. Too soon. Taehyung's eyes sparkled. But judging by the way you two look like you just survived a confession scene in a drama, I'm guessing something happened. Jungkook muttered, that obvious. Painfully, Taehyung replied. Jimin looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him. Taehyung leaned closer. So, he said quietly, who confessed first? Silence. Jungkook rubbed the back of his neck. Technically, the song. Taehyung blinked. The song confessed. Jimin looked like he might actually die of embarrassment. I hate both of you. Taehyung suddenly burst out laughing. I knew it. He clapped loudly, packing the room with excitement. I've been waiting years for this. Jimin stared at him in disbelief. You knew. Taehyung stopped walking. Jimin, he said gently, you look at Jungkook like he's the last person on earth. Jimin froze. And Jungkook, Taehyung added, turning to him, you get jealous when Jimin talks to literally anyone else. Jungkook choked on air. That is not. Taehyung raised a finger. You glared at a backup dancer in 2019. Jungkook opened his mouth. Closed it. That was different. Taehyung snorted. Sure. Jimin sank back into the chair, staring at the ceiling. This is a nightmare. No, Taehyung corrected cheerfully, this is romantic. Jungkook sat on the edge of the desk. Actually, it's terrifying. Taehyung suddenly became more serious. Yeah, he admitted quietly. The room went still. Because they all understood what he meant. Fame had rules, expectations, millions of eyes watching every move. Taehyung leaned against the console. You two thought about what happens if people find out. Jimin nodded slowly. Every day. Jungkook looked at the floor. But hiding forever isn't exactly living either. Taehyung studied them carefully. Then he sighed. You know, he said, this might actually be the least shocking thing in the world. Both of them looked at him. What do you mean? Jimin asked. Taehyung shrugged. You two orbit each other like planets. Jungkook frowned. That's not scientific. It is emotionally scientific, Taehyung replied confidently. Jimin laughed despite himself. But before anyone could say anything else, the studio door opened again. This time more cautiously. Namjoon stepped inside. All three of them froze instantly. Namjoon looked from one face to another. Taehyung grinning. Jungkook tense. Jimin pale. Namjoon sighed deeply. Why does this feel like I just walked into a disaster? Taehyung raised his hand. Technically, a romantic disaster. Namjoon closed his eyes briefly. Do I want to know? Jungkook answered quietly. Probably not. Namjoon opened one eye. Too late, I already do. The silence stretched. Finally, Jimin stood up. His voice was calm, but his heart was pounding. I wrote a song, he said. Namjoon nodded. Okay. It's about Jungkook. Namjoon blinked once. Then twice. Taehyung waited. Jungkook braced himself. Namjoon slowly rubbed his temples. Of course it is. Jimin stared at him. You're not shocked. Namjoon looked genuinely tired. I manage 7 artists with emotional complexity and 0 sleep. Nothing shocks me anymore. Taehyung burst out laughing. Jungkook let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Namjoon studied them both carefully. Do you care about each other? Jungkook answered instantly. Yes. Jimin's voice followed quietly. More than anything. Namjoon watched their faces. Then he nodded slowly. Then we'll figure out the rest. Jimin felt something inside his chest loosen for the first time all night. But just as the tension began to ease, Taehyung suddenly leaned forward. Wait, he said. Everyone looked at him. Taehyung grinned mischievously. One question. Jimin narrowed his eyes. What? Taehyung pointed toward the recording booth. When do I get to hear the song that started all this chaos? Jimin groaned again. But Jungkook smiled. Because for the first time since hearing that first lyric outside the door, the chaos didn't feel like something to fear. It felt like the beginning of something impossible. And maybe something worth fighting for. The studio felt smaller after Namjoon closed the door behind him. Not physically smaller, but the air inside the room seemed heavier, as if the truth that had just been spoken aloud had weight. Jimin could still hear the echo of his own confession in his head. A song written in secret had suddenly turned into something real, something dangerous. Taehyung was already sitting on the couch like he had front-row tickets to a drama. Play the song, he said immediately. Jimin groaned. No. Taehyung leaned forward. Yes. Namjoon crossed his arms. I actually agree with Taehyung. Jungkook glanced at Jimin. You don't have to, he said softly. Jimin looked at him. And somehow that made it worse. Because Jungkook looked calm. Too calm for someone who had just admitted feelings that could explode their entire world. Jimin ran a hand through his hair. You guys realize that song is basically a confession letter, he said. Taehyung shrugged, even better. Namjoon added quietly, we should hear it. Jimin hesitated. Then he looked at Jungkook again. Jungkook simply nodded once. Something warm and terrifying spread through Jimin's chest. Fine, he muttered. He walked toward the console and pressed the playback button. The room filled with the opening piano again. This time, the silence was different. No one joked, no one moved. Jimin's voice drifted through the speakers, fragile and exposed. I kept pretending I didn't know your heart because mine was already breaking. Taehyung's grin slowly faded. Namjoon leaned forward slightly. Jungkook didn't look at anyone. His eyes were fixed on the floor, listening to every word like it mattered more than breathing. The next line arrived. You laugh too loud when you're nervous. You bite your lip when you lie. Taehyung slowly turned his head toward Jungkook. Jungkook immediately stopped, biting his lip. Taehyung whispered, wow. Namjoon rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Jimin stared at the console like he wanted to disappear into it. The chorus filled the studio. I was afraid to ask, afraid you'd disappear if I said it out loud. The song ended. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Taehyung exhaled dramatically. Holy! Namjoon cut him off. Language! Taehyung ignored him. That is the most obvious love song I've ever heard. Jimin covered his face. Thank you for your delicate feedback. Namjoon looked at Jungkook. Well, Jungkook lifted his head slowly. His voice was quiet. It's beautiful. Jimin peeked through his fingers. You're not just saying that. Jungkook shook his head. You turned years of silence into 3 minutes. The room went still again. Taehyung leaned back against the couch. Okay, he said, now comes the terrifying part. Jimin frowned. What terrifying part? Taehyung pointed at them both. You too. Namjoon nodded slightly. He's right. Jungkook crossed his arms. What about us? Taehyung looked at him like the answer was obvious. You just confessed mutual feelings in the middle of your careers. Jimin sighed. Yes, we noticed. Taehyung shook his head. No, I mean seriously, what happens now? Jimin didn't answer. Because that question had been sitting in the back of his mind for years. Jungkook spoke first. We keep living. Taehyung blinked. That's your plan. Jungkook shrugged. What's the alternative? Pretend this didn't happen. Namjoon watched him carefully. You're not scared. Jungkook gave a small laugh. Of course I am. He looked at Jimin. But I'm more scared of losing this chance. Jimin's heart skipped painfully. Taehyung stared at them both. You two are insane. Namjoon nodded slowly. Probably. Jimin leaned against the desk. But maybe insanity is overdue. The rain outside intensified, tapping harder against the windows. For a moment, everything felt strangely calm. Until Taehyung's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. Then his expression changed. What? Jungkook asked. Taehyung frowned. It's a group chat notification. Namjoon sighed. Which one? Taehyung turned the phone around. The group chat name glowed on the screen. Management team. Namjoon's stomach dropped. What do they want at 2 in the morning? Taehyung opened the message. His eyes scanned the text. Then widened. Hello. Jimin straightened. What? Taehyung looked up slowly. You guys might want to sit down. Jungkook felt cold suddenly. Taehyung. Taehyung showed the screen. A news article link filled the message preview. The headline read, "Late night studio recording. Fans spot Jungkook and Jimin together again." Jimin blinked. "That's normal." Taehyung scrolled. Then another line appeared under the headline. Audio leak sparks speculation about mysterious love song. The room froze. Jungkook's voice dropped. Audio leaked. Taehyung pressed play on the attached clip. From the phone speaker, a distorted recording played. Jimin's voice, singing the chorus, not the clean studio version. A muffled recording, like someone had captured it through a wall. Jimin's face drained of color. "That's impossible." Namjoon's voice was sharp. "Who else was here tonight?" Everyone looked at each other. The studio had been nearly empty. But nearly wasn't the same as completely. Jungkook's fists clenched. Taehyung read more from the article. Fans think the lyrics might be about someone inside the group. Jimin felt his pulse pounding. Namjoon took the phone. "How many views?" Taehyung answered quietly. 200,000. Jimin whispered, "Already." Namjoon refreshed the page. The number jumped. 240,000. Jungkook's jaw tightened. "This just started." Taehyung nodded slowly. "And it's spreading fast." The room felt colder now. Jimin stared at the speakers that had played his secret only minutes earlier. Somehow the world outside had already heard a piece of it. Namjoon turned to them. His voice was calm but firm. "We need to control this before it turns into something bigger." Jungkook asked quietly, "Too late?" Namjoon didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the screen again. The view count kept rising. 300,000. Taehyung leaned forward. "You guys might not like my question." Jimin sighed. "Ask it." Taehyung met their eyes. "If the whole world finds out this song is about Jungkook." He paused. "Are you ready for what happens next?" No one answered. Because for the first time that night, the confession between them didn't feel like the biggest storm coming. It felt like the calm before something far more dangerous. The rain outside the studio had turned violent, slamming against the windows like fists demanding entry. Inside, the quiet glow of the monitors painted everyone's faces in pale blue light, making the tension look even sharper. Jimin couldn't stop staring at the phone in Namjoon's hand. The number kept climbing. 300,000 views. 350. 400. Each refresh felt like a countdown to something none of them could control. "How is that even possible?" Jimin whispered. Namjoon scrolled through the comments, his expression tightening. "Someone recorded the audio from outside the studio hallway," he said, "probably through the wall or door." Taehyung leaned forward, but the hallway was empty. Jungkook's voice was low and tense. "Not completely." Everyone looked at him. Jungkook's jaw flexed. "When I arrived earlier, I saw someone leaving the stairwell." Jimin blinked. "Who?" "I didn't see clearly," Jungkook admitted, "just a hoodie and a phone." Namjoon swore under his breath. Taehyung shook his head slowly. "Fans sometimes sneak into the building," he said, "but recording inside the hallway." Jimin suddenly felt sick. "This is my fault." Jungkook looked at him sharply. "No." "I sang it out loud," Jimin said, running both hands through his hair. "I should have kept it private." Jungkook stepped closer. "You wrote that song because you were honest," he said. "That's not something to regret." Jimin laughed bitterly. Tell that to the internet. Taehyung scrolled through the article comments. His expression twisted. Oh, this is getting messy. Namjoon glanced at the screen. What are they saying? Taehyung hesitated. Fans are trying to guess who the song is about. Jungkook crossed his arms. And Taehyung swallowed. Some of them already think it's you. The words landed like a dropped glass. Jimin closed his eyes. Namjoon spoke calmly but firmly. This is still speculation. Taehyung nodded slowly. For now. Jungkook leaned against the desk, his mind racing. He had lived under public scrutiny for years. Rumors came and went like waves. But this was different. This rumor had truth inside it. And the truth made it dangerous. Jimin's voice broke the silence. What do we do? Namjoon exhaled slowly. First, we stay calm. Taehyung muttered, easy for you to say. Namjoon shot him a look. Second, we talk to management before making any decisions. Jungkook frowned. What kind of decisions? Namjoon looked at him carefully. The kind that protect everyone. Jimin felt a knot form in his chest. Protect or hide? Namjoon didn't answer immediately. The rain hammered harder against the glass. Taehyung suddenly straightened. Oh great. Namjoon turned toward him. What now? Taehyung held up the phone again. The clip just passed 1 million views. Jimin's stomach dropped. 1 million. In 20 minutes, Taehyung said. Jungkook cursed quietly. Namjoon rubbed his forehead. That's fast, even for fan speculation. Taehyung kept scrolling. And now people are enhancing the audio. Jimin blinked. What does that mean? They're cleaning the recording, Taehyung said, trying to hear the lyrics more clearly. Jungkook's heart pounded. If they hear everything, they'll understand exactly what the song means, Namjoon finished. The room fell silent again. Jimin stared at Jungkook. His chest felt tight, like every breath carried weight. I never wanted to drag you into something like this. Jungkook looked at him, surprised. You think I'm being dragged? Jimin's voice cracked. Your career. My career is not more important than honesty, Jungkook said. Taehyung raised an eyebrow. That sentence alone will cause 10 scandals. Jungkook ignored him. He stepped closer to Jimin until they were standing only inches apart. You didn't force anything, Jungkook said quietly. I chose this too. Jimin searched his face. Even if things get ugly. Jungkook smiled faintly. Things are already ugly, the internet exists. Taehyung snorted. Namjoon shook his head but couldn't hide a small smile. For a moment, the tension eased. Then the phone rang. Everyone jumped. Namjoon looked at the screen. Management. He answered immediately. Yes. The others watched his face carefully. At first Namjoon listened quietly. Then his expression darkened. I understand, he said. Silence. Jimin's heart pounded louder. Namjoon finally spoke again. No, they're here with me. Another pause. Taehyung whispered, that can't be good. Namjoon turned slightly away from them. We'll come down. He ended the call. The room felt colder instantly. Jungkook spoke first. What did they say? Namjoon looked at all three of them. They saw the video. Jimin swallowed. And Namjoon hesitated. They want to talk immediately. Taehyung sighed dramatically. Of course they do. Jungkook's voice was steady. Are we in trouble? Namjoon didn't answer right away. Instead, he picked up his coat. Let's just say they're concerned. Jimin felt dread creep into his chest. Concerned from management rarely meant something small. Taehyung grabbed the snacks he had brought earlier. Well, he muttered, this night just keeps getting better. They walked toward the door together. Jimin paused before leaving the studio. He looked back at the microphone inside the recording booth. Just an hour ago, it had felt like a private confession. Now it felt like evidence. Jungkook noticed his hesitation. You okay? Jimin forced a small nod. I just didn't expect the world to hear that song before you did. Jungkook looked at him with quiet intensity. I'm glad I heard it first. Jimin felt warmth spread through his chest again, despite the fear. Taehyung cleared his throat loudly. Not to interrupt the emotional moment, he said, but management is probably preparing 10 different panic plans downstairs. Namjoon opened the door. Let's go. They stepped into the hallway. The building lights flickered slightly from the storm outside. As they walked toward the elevator, the weight of what waited below grew heavier with every step. Jimin glanced at Jungkook. Jungkook met his gaze. Neither of them spoke, but both of them understood the same terrifying truth. The song that had been meant as a quiet reply to hidden feelings had just turned into a story the entire world might try to finish for them. The elevator ride down felt longer than it should have. No one spoke. The soft hum of the elevator motor echoed in the confined space while the numbers above the door slowly counted down. Jimin could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered slightly, casting pale shadows across their faces. Taehyung leaned against the mirrored wall with his arms crossed, studying everyone through the reflection. You know, he muttered after a moment, most people spend Tuesday nights sleeping. Namjoon didn't respond. Jungkook stood beside Jimin, hands shoved deep into the pockets of his jacket. He looked calm on the surface, but the tension in his shoulders gave him away. Jimin noticed it. You don't have to do this, Jimin said quietly. Jungkook turned his head. Do what? Stand there like you're ready to fight the world, Jimin replied. Jungkook gave a soft, almost amused breath. I've been doing that since debut. Taehyung raised a finger. Fair point. The elevator dinged. The doors slid open. The management floor was still lit despite the late hour. The corridor lights glowed bright and sterile, the kind of lighting that made every emotion feel exposed. At the end of the hallway, a glass meeting room waited. Inside, 2 managers and 1 senior executive were already seated. Namjoon sighed quietly. All right, he murmured, stay calm. Taehyung whispered back, you say that like we're not walking into an interrogation. Jimin felt his stomach twist. Namjoon pushed the door open. Every head inside the room turned immediately. Manager Lee spoke first. Sit down. No greeting, no smile. Just tension. They took their seats across the long table. Jungkook sat beside Jimin. The senior executive folded his hands together. You've seen the situation online. Namjoon nodded. Yes. Manager Lee slid a tablet across the table. The screen showed the viral clip again. The view count now read 2.4 million. Jimin felt dizzy. That's in under an hour, Manager Lee said. Taehyung whistled softly. That's actually impressive. Namjoon elbowed him. The executive's eyes moved slowly between them. Which one of you wrote the song? Jimin didn't hesitate. I did. The room fell silent. Manager Lee leaned forward. Is the song about someone specific? Jimin's throat tightened. Namjoon spoke carefully. It's a personal track, not meant for release yet. The executive didn't look at Namjoon. His gaze remained fixed on Jimin. That wasn't my question. Jimin felt Jungkook shift slightly beside him. Answering that won't stop speculation, Jimin said. Manager Lee sighed. Park Jimin, the internet already believes this is about someone inside the group. Taehyung muttered, the internet believes aliens built the pyramids too. No one laughed. The executive's voice turned colder. Is the song about Jungkook? The room froze. Jimin's chest felt like it had stopped working. Jungkook suddenly spoke. Yes. Every head snapped toward him. Manager Lee blinked. You're confirming that? Jungkook met their eyes calmly. I'm saying the song reflects real feelings. Jimin stared at him in shock. Jungkook. But Jungkook continued. And those feelings aren't one-sided. The silence became suffocating. Manager Lee leaned back slowly. You realize what you're saying? Jungkook nodded. Yes. The executive's expression hardened. This could destroy careers. Taehyung sat forward suddenly. Or maybe it won't. All eyes turned to him. Taehyung shrugged. Fans aren't stupid, he said. They already see everything we try to hide. Manager Lee rubbed his temples. This is not a philosophical debate. Namjoon finally spoke. We understand the risks. The executive tapped the table once. You don't understand the scale of this risk. He turned the tablet toward them again. New headlines had already appeared. Fans analyze emotional love song. Is it about Jungkook? Secret relationship. Rumors explode after leaked studio audio. Industry shock over possible idol confession. Jimin felt his stomach sink deeper. Taehyung whispered, wow, that escalated quickly. The executive's voice sharpened. If this rumor continues, media outlets will start asking questions. Jungkook didn't look away. So, Manager Lee slammed his hand lightly on the table. So you deny it? The words hung in the air like a command. Jimin felt his chest tighten painfully. Deny it. Erase it. Pretend the song meant nothing. Jungkook looked at Jimin. Their eyes met. 1,000 thoughts passed between them without words. Fear. Hope. Uncertainty. Namjoon watched both of them carefully. Then he spoke. Let's think about this logically. Manager Lee nodded eagerly. Yes, exactly. Namjoon continued slowly. If they deny the meaning now, fans will analyze the song even harder. The executive frowned slightly. And if they confirm it, he asked. Namjoon's voice stayed calm. Then at least the narrative becomes honest. Manager Lee looked horrified. You're suggesting they admit it publicly. Taehyung leaned back in his chair. Honestly, that would break the internet. Jimin whispered, please stop saying things like that. The executive studied Jungkook. You seem very calm for someone whose career might explode tonight. Jungkook's answer was quiet. I've spent years being careful. He glanced at Jimin. Maybe I'm tired of being careful. Jimin's heart pounded violently. Manager Lee looked like he might faint. This is insane. Taehyung tilted his head. Or brave. Namjoon sighed. Or both. The executive stood slowly. He walked toward the window, looking down at the dark city below. Rain streaked across the glass. Millions of lights blinked in the distance. Finally, he spoke again. If the truth comes out, it will become one of the biggest stories in the industry. No one argued. Fans will divide, he continued. Media will dissect every moment of your past. Jimin felt cold. But the executive added quietly, you might also gain something else. Taehyung raised an eyebrow. What? The executive turned back toward them. Respect. The room went silent again. Manager Lee looked stunned. You can't be serious. The executive shrugged slightly. The world is changing. Jungkook spoke softly. I don't want a scandal. Jimin added quietly, neither do I. The executive nodded. But you also don't want to lie. Jimin looked at Jungkook again. Jungkook nodded once. Manager Lee sank into his chair. This is a nightmare. Taehyung grinned faintly. Mori like a revolution. Namjoon rubbed his forehead. Let's not call it that. The executive picked up the tablet again. The view count had passed 5 million. He looked at them carefully. You have two choices. Jimin held his breath. Deny everything, the executive said, or prepare for the truth. The storm outside roared louder. Inside the meeting room, the silence stretched like a wire ready to snap. And for the first time that night, Jimin realized the song he had written in secret was no longer just about love. It had become a decision that could change everything. The rain had not stopped when they left the meeting room. It poured harder now, thick lines of water streaking down the tall glass windows of the building as if the sky itself was struggling to hold something back. Inside the conference room, the air had turned suffocating. No one moved for several seconds after the executive finished speaking. Deny everything, or prepare for the truth. Jimin felt like the entire building had gone silent around those words. Manager Lee broke first. This shouldn't even be a debate, he said sharply, pushing his chair back a little. You deny it immediately. We release a statement saying the song is fictional and the rumors are ridiculous. Taehyung scoffed. Fans aren't idiots. Manager Lee shot him an irritated look. Fans will believe what we tell them if we say it strongly enough. Taehyung leaned forward across the table. You've clearly never met our fans. Namjoon quietly placed a hand on Taehyung's arm. Let's keep this calm. Jungkook had been silent since the executive spoke. He stared at the table, fingers slowly tapping against the wood as if measuring every possible future in his head. Jimin watched him carefully. What are you thinking? Jimin asked softly. Jungkook didn't answer immediately. Instead, he lifted his head and looked directly at the executive. If we deny it, he said slowly, the rumors will still exist. Manager Lee snapped, but they'll lose credibility. No, Jungkook replied calmly, they'll grow. The room went still. Jungkook leaned forward slightly. Because fans will compare the lyrics to our behavior, he continued. Every stage performance, every interview, every old clip. Taehyung nodded. They're already doing that. Manager Lee ran a frustrated hand through his hair. This is exactly why the song should never have been recorded like that. Jimin's chest tightened. Don't blame him, Jungkook said immediately. Manager Lee looked at him sharply. I'm blaming the situation. The executive raised his hand, silencing the argument. We are not here to assign blame. His gaze moved slowly between Jungkook and Jimin. We are here to decide how much truth the world will hear. Jimin felt his pulse racing again. How long do we have? He asked. The executive looked at the tablet. Not long. He turned the screen toward them again. The numbers had climbed to 7.8 million views. New headlines had appeared. Fans analyze hidden message between two members. Internet detectives compare lyrics with old interviews. Taehyung leaned over the table. "Oh wow." He pointed at the screen. "They found that clip from 3 years ago." Jimin frowned. "What clip?" Taehyung pressed play. The video showed an old backstage interview. Jimin was laughing about something while Jungkook stood beside him. In the clip, the interviewer jokingly asked Jungkook who he trusted most in the group. Without hesitation, Jungkook had answered, "Jimin." The video zoomed in on Jimin's surprised smile. Back in the meeting room, Taehyung whistled. "They're connecting everything." Manager Lee groaned. "This is spiraling out of control." Namjoon looked thoughtful. "Fans remember everything." Jimin whispered, "We never tried very hard to hide it." Jungkook smiled faintly. "That's because we didn't realize how obvious we were." Taehyung laughed quietly. "Oh, it was obvious." Manager Lee looked ready to explode. "Can we focus?" The executive turned back to Jungkook. "If the truth becomes public," he said, "your lives will change overnight." Jungkook didn't look scared. "My life already changed tonight." Jimin felt his chest tighten again. The executive continued. "Endorsements may disappear." "Okay." "Certain countries might ban promotions." Jungkook shrugged slightly. "Maybe." Manager Lee slammed a folder on the table. "You're being reckless." Jungkook's voice sharpened for the first time. "No." The room froze. Jungkook looked directly at him. "I'm being honest." The tension crackled like electricity. Manager Lee stood up. "You're thinking with your emotions." Jungkook stood too. "And you're thinking like people are machines." Namjoon immediately stepped between them. "All right, enough." The room went silent again. Jimin slowly stood as well. He felt strangely calm now, like the storm inside him had already passed. "Can I say something?" he asked quietly. Everyone looked at him. Jimin took a slow breath. "I wrote that song because I was tired of pretending," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but every word landed clearly. "For years we've been told to be careful, to protect our image, to avoid anything that might upset people." Manager Lee opened his mouth, but Jimin continued. "I understand why, I really do." He looked down at the table for a moment. "But the truth is, I didn't write that song for the public." He turned toward Jungkook. "I wrote it because I thought he would never hear it." Jungkook's eyes softened. The executive watched them both carefully. Jimin continued quietly. "And somehow the world heard it before he did." Taehyung whispered under his breath, "That's actually poetic." Namjoon nodded slightly. Jimin looked back at the executive. "So if the question is whether I regret writing it." He paused. "I don't." The silence that followed felt enormous. Manager Lee sat down again slowly. The executive studied Jimin's face for a long moment. Then he asked one final question. "If you could go back to yesterday," he said calmly, "before the leak happened, would you still write the song?" Jimin didn't hesitate. "Yes." Jungkook spoke immediately after. "And I would still listen to it." Taehyung leaned back in his chair with a quiet sigh. "Well," he muttered, "there it is." The executive finally nodded. Then he turned the tablet off. "Then the next step is simple." Everyone leaned forward slightly. Manager Lee looked terrified. The executive's voice was steady. We stop running from the story. The room went completely silent again. Because suddenly, the choice they had been debating all night no longer felt like a question. It felt like the beginning of something the entire world would soon hear. The rain had slowed by the time they left the conference room, but the storm inside the building had only grown stronger. The hallway lights buzzed faintly above them as the door clicked shut behind the group. For a moment, none of them moved. The conversation they had just finished still hung in the air like a spark waiting to ignite something larger. Taehyung stretched his arms over his head with exaggerated exhaustion. "Well," he said, "that went better than I expected." Manager Lee, who had followed them out, turned sharply. "You call that better?" Taehyung shrugged. "No one got fired. That's usually my baseline for success." Namjoon rubbed his temples. "Can we not joke about this right now?" Taehyung raised both hands in surrender. "Fine." Jimin leaned against the wall, trying to steady the whirlwind in his chest. Everything had happened too quickly. Only hours ago the song had been a quiet confession inside a studio. Now executives were talking about confronting the entire world with the truth. He glanced at Jungkook. Jungkook looked strangely calm again, though the tightness in his jaw suggested the calm was carefully controlled. Manager Lee stepped closer to them. "I still think this is a terrible idea," he said. "We should release a denial statement before the rumor grows any further." Namjoon shook his head slowly. "It's already grown." As if summoned by those words, Taehyung's phone buzzed again. He glanced down. Then his eyebrows shot up. "Those." Everyone looked at him immediately. "What now?" Jimin asked. Taehyung turned the phone around. The headline on the screen glowed like a flare. Anonymous source claims love song was written for group member. Jimin felt the blood drain from his face. Jungkook leaned closer. "Zozu." Taehyung scrolled. "Apparently someone who works in the building." Manager Lee swore quietly. "That leak shouldn't exist." Namjoon's voice turned sharp. "Who else knew about the song?" Jimin shook his head. "No one, I wrote it alone." Taehyung frowned. "Someone must have overheard something earlier." Jungkook's eyes narrowed. "The whole way." They all remembered the shadowy figure Jungkook had mentioned earlier. Manager Lee paced across the floor. "This is exactly what I warned about. Once rumors start, everyone wants to feed them." Namjoon took the phone from Taehyung and read through the article quickly. "They're not naming anyone yet," he said. "But they're implying enough," Taehyung added. Jimin felt the floor tilt beneath him. Fans are going to start digging through everything. Taehyung gave a dry laugh. "They already are." He opened another page and showed them. A fan thread filled the screen with screenshots from years of performances and interviews. Clips of Jimin and Jungkook laughing together. Moments where their hands brushed on stage. Old comments about how close they were. Jimin stared at it helplessly. "They're analyzing everything." Taehyung nodded. "Frame by frame." Jungkook suddenly laughed softly. Everyone looked at him. "You find this funny?" Manager Lee asked. Jungkook shook his head. "No, just ironic." He gestured toward the screen. "We spent years thinking we were being subtle." Taehyung grinned. "You were." Namjoon sighed deeply. "This is going to get worse before it gets better." Manager Lee looked at him in disbelief. "You're still assuming it will get better." Before Namjoon could answer, footsteps echoed from the far end of the hallway. Another staff member hurried toward them, holding a tablet. His expression was tense. Have you seen this? Namjoon frowned. What is it? The staff member turned the tablet around. A video was playing. This one wasn't from the hallway. It was from inside the studio building. Security camera footage. Jimin's stomach dropped. The clip showed the hallway outside the recording room earlier that night. The door, the dim lighting, and then a figure. A person in a hoodie standing outside the studio door with a phone raised. Recording. Taehyung leaned closer. That's the person you saw. Jungkook nodded slowly. Manager Lee's voice was tight. Do we know who that is? The staff member shook his head. The camera angle doesn't show the face. Namjoon studied the footage carefully. How did this video get online? The staff member swallowed. It didn't. Everyone blinked. Then why are you showing it to us? Taehyung asked. The staff member hesitated. Because someone sent it to the company email 10 minutes ago. A chill spread through the hallway. Jimin felt his pulse spike. They sent it. Yes. Namjoon's voice lowered. With a message. The staff member nodded. He opened another screen and read quietly. Release the truth before we do. The silence that followed was suffocating. Taehyung whispered, that's blackmail. Manager Lee looked furious. Or a threat. Jungkook's eyes darkened. They want control of the story. Namjoon exhaled slowly. And they might get it. Jimin felt something inside him shift. Fear was still there, heavy and real. But something else was rising too. Resolve. He straightened. If they're going to release it anyway. Everyone turned toward him. Then maybe we shouldn't wait. Manager Lee stared at him. You can't be serious. Jimin met his gaze. I'm tired of letting strangers decide what our story is. Jungkook stepped beside him. I agree. Namjoon looked between them both. You realize this will explode across every news channel in the world. Taehyung grinned faintly. That already sounds like it's happening. Manager Lee rubbed his face with both hands. I cannot believe this conversation. Jungkook looked at Jimin. His voice softened slightly. If we tell the truth, we do it together. Jimin nodded. Together. The hallway lights hummed above them. Outside, the rain finally began to fade into a soft drizzle. Inside the building, the tension had reached a point where silence felt impossible. Namjoon looked at the group one last time. Then he spoke quietly. All right. Everyone waited. If the truth is going to come out. He paused. We make sure it comes from us first. And for the first time that night, the fear that had been chasing them since the song leaked began transforming into something far more dangerous. A decision. The building felt strangely quiet after the decision was spoken aloud. For a long moment, no one moved in the hallway. The soft buzzing of the ceiling lights seemed louder than usual, like the building itself was holding its breath. Taehyung was the first to break the silence. So we're really doing this, he said slowly. Manager Lee looked like he might collapse. You're talking about detonating a nuclear bomb in the middle of the industry. Jungkook leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. Or telling the truth. Manager Lee shot him an exhausted look. You say that like the world is ready for it. Taehyung tilted his head. The world is never ready for anything. Namjoon rubbed the bridge of his nose. We need to think carefully before we move. Jimin nodded quietly, though his chest still felt like it was vibrating from adrenaline. The hallway door suddenly opened again. Footsteps approached quickly. Everyone turned. Yoongi stepped into the corridor with a cup of coffee in one hand and his phone in the other. His expression was calm, almost sleepy. But when he looked up and saw the group gathered outside the conference room at nearly 3 in the morning, his eyes narrowed slightly. Why does this look like a disaster meeting? Taehyung sighed dramatically. Because it is. Yoongi raised an eyebrow. Explain. Namjoon walked over to him. There's a situation online. Yoongi glanced down at his phone. You mean the leaked audio? Everyone froze. Jimin blinked. You already saw it. Yoongi nodded. It's everywhere. He took a sip of his coffee like they were discussing the weather. Taehyung stared at him. You're weirdly calm about this. Yoongi shrugged. I've seen worse scandals. Manager Lee muttered under his breath, not like this. Yoongi studied their faces carefully. Then his eyes landed on Jungkook. It's about you, isn't it? Jungkook didn't answer. Jimin did. Yes. Yoongi looked at him for a long moment. Is it true? The question wasn't judgmental, it was direct. Jimin felt the weight of it. Yes. Yoongi nodded slowly. Okay. Taehyung blinked. That's your reaction. Yoongi shrugged. What reaction were you expecting? Taehyung spread his arms. Shock screaming, a dramatic faint. Yoongi sipped his coffee again. You're confusing me with a television character. Namjoon exhaled quietly. We are considering telling the truth. Yoongi's eyes sharpened slightly. Publicly. Yes. Manager Lee threw his hands up again. This is insanity. Yoongi looked at him. Why? Manager Lee stared at him like the answer was obvious. Because it will become the biggest scandal of the decade. Yoongi leaned against the wall. Maybe. The hallway fell quiet again. Yoongi glanced at Jungkook. Do you care about him? Jungkook answered instantly. Yes. Yoongi turned to Jimin. And you? Jimin met his gaze. Yes. Yoongi nodded once. Then I don't see the problem. Manager Lee let out a noise of disbelief. This is not a romantic drama. There are contracts, investors, international markets. Yoongi shrugged again. There are also human beings. Taehyung clapped quietly. Thank you. Namjoon looked thoughtful. This isn't just about them. Everyone turned toward him. Namjoon continued slowly. If we confirm the rumor, it won't just affect the two of them. It will affect the entire group. The weight of that statement settled heavily. Jimin's chest tightened. I never wanted to hurt the group. Yoongi looked at him. You didn't. Manager Lee sighed. You don't understand the industry consequences. Yoongi's voice stayed calm. I understand them perfectly. Taehyung grinned. He really does. Namjoon looked at Jungkook again. Are you absolutely sure about this? Jungkook didn't hesitate. Yes. Jimin glanced at him, his heart racing. Jungkook noticed. If we run from this now, he said quietly, we'll spend the rest of our lives hiding. Jimin's throat tightened. Taehyung leaned closer. You two realize fans might lose their minds. Yoongi muttered, fans lose their minds every week. Manager Lee shook his head. You're all treating this too casually. Namjoon finally straightened. Then let's stop being casual. Everyone fell silent again. Namjoon looked at each of them in turn. This decision has to be unanimous, he said, not just from them, from all of us. Taehyung nodded immediately. I'm in. Yoongi shrugged. I don't see a reason to lie. Manager Lee looked horrified. You two are unbelievable. Namjoon turned to him. Your concern is valid. Manager Lee crossed his arms. Of course it is. Namjoon continued calmly. But this group has survived things before. Taehyung added softly, because we stood together. Jimin felt a sudden pressure behind his eyes. For years, they had faced the world as a team. Now the world might turn on them because of him. He looked down. You don't have to protect me. Jungkook's voice cut through the hallway. We are not protecting you. Jimin looked up. Jungkook's gaze was steady. We are standing with you. The words landed like warmth in the cold hallway. Yoongi glanced at the clock on the wall. It's almost 4 in the morning. Taehyung yawned. Great, perfect time to break the internet. Namjoon took a slow breath. If we're doing this, we do it carefully. Manager Lee looked defeated. You're really going through with it. Namjoon nodded. Yes. The manager sighed heavily. Then we need a statement. Yoongi spoke quietly. Not a statement. Everyone looked at him. A message. Taehyung tilted his head. What kind of message? Yoongi finished his coffee. The honest kind. Jimin felt his heartbeat quicken again. Outside the building, the storm clouds were finally beginning to break apart. But inside the quiet hallway, something much larger than a storm was beginning to form. Because in a few hours, when the world woke up and opened their phones, the story they would see might not be a rumor anymore. It might be the truth. Morning arrived slowly over the city, pale gray light slipping between the tall buildings like a quiet warning. The rain had stopped, but the streets below were still slick and shining, reflecting the neon signs that had stayed awake through the night. Inside the company building, however, no one had slept. The conference room lights were still on. Coffee cups littered the long table, half empty and forgotten. Several laptops glowed with open news pages and social media feeds that refreshed every few seconds. Jimin sat near the end of the table, elbows resting on his knees, staring at the floor as if it might suddenly provide answers. Across from him, Taehyung was scrolling through his phone with the kind of focus usually reserved for bomb defusal. Oh, Taehyung muttered suddenly. Namjoon looked up. What now? Taehyung slowly turned his phone around. The headline on the screen was larger than the others. Leaked love song sparks massive debate, fans divided over possible relationship. Jungkook leaned closer. How many views? Taehyung refreshed the page. 23 million. Manager Lee let out a low groan and sank deeper into his chair. It's not even noon yet. Yoongi leaned against the wall near the window, arms crossed, watching the sunlight creep slowly across the floor. That's how the internet works, he said calmly. Jimin felt his stomach twist. What are people saying? Taehyung gave a small, uncertain smile. Everything. He scrolled down. Some fans are defending you too. He scrolled again. And some are not. Namjoon sighed quietly. Expected. Taehyung read one comment aloud. If the song is about Jungkook, then they should just admit it instead of hiding. He paused. Then read another. This would destroy the group's image. The room fell silent. Jimin closed his eyes for a moment. Jungkook noticed immediately. Don't read those, he said. Taehyung looked up. You sure? Yes. Taehyung shrugged and locked his phone. Fine. Manager Lee suddenly stood up. We need to finalize the message before media outlets start calling. Namjoon nodded. They already have. Manager Lee blinked. What? Namjoon gestured toward the phones on the table. They started an hour ago. Taehyung raised his eyebrows. Wow, journalists wake up fast when there's drama. Yoongi walked over and sat at the table. So what exactly are we saying? Manager Lee picked up a document and placed it in the center of the table. A simple clarification statement. Jungkook glanced down at it. His expression tightened. The document read, "The song recorded last night was a personal artistic project and does not reflect any romantic relationship between members. We ask fans to refrain from speculation." Jimin felt his chest grow tight again. That's not the truth. Manager Lee exhaled sharply. It's damage control. Jungkook pushed the paper back across the table. No. Manager Lee looked stunned. No. No, Jungkook repeated calmly. Jimin felt his heart start racing again. Manager Lee stared at him. You're refusing the official statement. Jungkook nodded. Yes. Taehyung leaned back in his chair slowly. Well, here we go. Namjoon looked at Jungkook carefully. You understand the consequences. Jungkook met his gaze. Yes. Jimin spoke quietly. If we're telling the truth, we shouldn't hide behind a corporate message. Yoongi nodded slightly. Agreed. Manager Lee rubbed his forehead in frustration. You're all making this far more complicated than it needs to be. Namjoon shook his head. No. Manager Lee looked at him. This situation is already complicated. The room fell quiet again. Taehyung suddenly sat up straight. Those. Everyone looked at him again. What now? Jimin asked nervously. Taehyung held up his phone. Someone posted a longer version of the leaked audio. Jimin froze. A longer version. Taehyung nodded slowly. They enhanced the sound. He pressed play. The recording filled the room. It was still distorted, but clearer now. Jimin's voice echoed through the speakers. I was afraid to ask, afraid you'd disappear if I said it out loud. Then the recording cut. But the implication was unmistakable. The room went completely silent. Manager Lee whispered, "This is getting worse." Taehyung refreshed the page again. The video already had 10 million views. Namjoon leaned forward. Media outlets will start publishing articles within minutes. Yoongi looked at Jungkook. So what's the plan? Jungkook didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at Jimin. Their eyes met across the table. For years they had shared stages, music, and quiet moments behind the chaos of fame. Now they were sharing something far more dangerous. Truth. Jungkook finally spoke. We make the message ourselves. Manager Lee looked horrified. You mean a video? Taehyung grinned. Oh, that would be legendary. Namjoon thought about it for a moment. It might actually be the clearest way. Jimin's voice was soft. You'd stand beside me for that. Jungkook smiled faintly. I already am. Yoongi pushed himself away from the wall. Then let's do it before someone else writes the story for us. Manager Lee sank back into his chair. I cannot believe this is happening. Taehyung stood up, stretching his arms again. Relax. Manager Lee glared at him. How exactly am I supposed to relax? Taehyung gave a mischievous smile. Because if this goes the way I think it will. He paused dramatically. Today might become one of the most unforgettable days in pop history. The room fell silent once more. Outside the window, the sun was finally rising above the skyline, casting warm light across the city. Inside the conference room, cameras were already being prepared. Because in a few minutes, the two people at the center of the storm were about to speak directly to millions of watching eyes. And whatever they said next would change everything. The camera light turned red. For a brief second, no one breathed. The small recording room felt far more intimidating than any stage they had ever stood on. There were no screaming fans here, no blinding concert lights, no choreography to hide behind. Just a single camera, a quiet microphone, and the weight of millions of people waiting on the other side of the screen. Jimin sat in the chair first. His hands rested on his knees, fingers lightly curled, as if holding invisible tension. Across the room, Namjoon watched carefully while a technician adjusted the camera angle. Jungkook stood beside the table for a moment, staring at the blank lens. "Still time to run," Taehyung whispered from the back of the room. Jungkook glanced over his shoulder. Taehyung grinned. "I'm kidding, mostly." Yoongi leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. "Stop distracting them." Manager Lee sat quietly in the corner, looking like a man witnessing a historic disaster in slow motion. Namjoon stepped forward. "You don't have to rush this," he said gently. Jimin took a slow breath. "I know." Jungkook pulled the chair beside him and sat down. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Not as performers, not as idols, just two people who had reached a point where silence was no longer possible. "You ready?" Jungkook asked quietly. Jimin nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." Namjoon looked toward the technician. "Start recording." The red light brightened. For the first few seconds, neither of them spoke. The quiet stretched long enough to feel real, not rehearsed. Finally, Jungkook leaned forward slightly. "Hello," he said calmly. "We know many of you have seen the recording that appeared online last night." Jimin's voice followed softly. It was never meant to be heard that way. He paused, but the words were real. Jungkook glanced at him briefly before continuing. The song Jimin recorded was personal, and the reason people recognized something in the lyrics is because the feelings behind them are real too. Outside the room, Taehyung held his breath. Yoongi didn't move. Manager Lee looked like he might faint. Inside the recording frame, Jimin looked directly into the camera. "For a long time, we kept certain parts of ourselves quiet," he said. His voice didn't shake. "Not because we were ashamed, but because we were afraid of how it might affect everyone around us." Jungkook nodded slowly. "But hiding things doesn't make them disappear." Jimin looked at him again. A small smile appeared, the same soft expression fans had seen on countless stages before. Except now, it meant something different. "Jungkook heard the song before the world did," Jimin said. And his answer was honesty. Jungkook let out a small breath. "I care about him," he said simply. The words landed quietly but firmly. "And he cares about me." There was no dramatic pause. No rehearsed speech. Just truth spoken in calm voices. Jimin continued. "We know this might surprise people." Jungkook added, "And we know not everyone will understand." Jimin's eyes softened. "But music has always been about telling the truth of how you feel." He gestured lightly toward the microphone beside them. "That song was my truth." Jungkook finished the thought. "And this moment is ours." The room stayed silent for several seconds after they stopped speaking. Then Namjoon quietly signaled the technician. The recording ended. The red light turned off. No one spoke immediately. Taehyung finally exhaled loudly. Well, he muttered, the internet just exploded. Yoongi pushed himself off the wall. Probably. Manager Lee buried his face in his hands. This is the most stressful morning of my life. Namjoon smiled faintly. Maybe. Jimin stood slowly. For the first time since the chaos began, the tension inside his chest felt lighter. Not gone, but lighter. Jungkook stood beside him. Regret it? He asked quietly. Jimin shook his head. No. Outside the building, the city had fully awakened. People rushed through busy streets, coffee shops opened their doors, and phones buzzed across the world as millions of viewers began watching the video that had just been uploaded. Some reactions were shocked. Some were confused. Some were angry. But many were something else entirely. Supportive. Curious. Moved. Inside the studio hallway, the group gathered together again. Taehyung slung an arm around Jungkook's shoulders. Congratulations, he said. You two just made history before breakfast. Yoongi smirked slightly. Let's survive the afternoon first. Namjoon looked at all of them. Through years of music, pressure, success, and storms, they had always faced the world together. Today was no different. Jimin looked at Jungkook one more time. You know, he said softly, that song was supposed to be a reply to feelings I thought you'd never hear. Jungkook smiled. And now the whole world heard it. Jimin laughed quietly. Not exactly what I planned. Jungkook shrugged. Sometimes the best stories aren't planned. Outside the studio windows, sunlight poured across the city, bright and unstoppable. Inside, the storm that had begun with a single song at a studio door had finally settled into something calmer. Not perfect, not simple, but honest. And sometimes honesty was the bravest ending a story could have.